The self is one alone. It is with no difference. It is only by misidentifying with the mind that one can think of a multiplicity of selves, internally, so to speak, and with misidentification with the body, that one can think of multiplicity of selves externally, so to speak. The internal and the external being determined again from the I am the body misidentification. But you are not the body, and you are not the mind. Unperceived, unconceived. The nature of the self is unalloyed, undifferentiated existence. One without anything other or different whatsoever. It is beginningless and eternal. It is limitless and thus truly infinite. Inconceivable, it is immeasurable. This, the perpetual, non-dual existence, is Brahman. And this Brahman is yourself. One should seek to realize the self for the sake of final peace and immortal bliss, and complete liberation from all of the imagined bondage and its consequent suffering. What is the nature of the realization that is to be sought? The nature of self-realization must necessarily be identical with the self that is to be realized. So then, just as the self is not an event with a beginning and an end, likewise self-realization is not an event. If it had a beginning, it would have an end. And as the Maharshi has instructed, what is not eternal is not worth seeking. So what is this self-realization? It is not an experience that comes to one as if you were an individual being who will experience another kind of self. For the individuality is just the primal misidentification, the I notion or I thought, as it is referred to. And your existence is not an experience, something that comes and goes. If it is not an event, not an experience, then similarly it is not a state of mind. Indeed, it is not anything transitory, not anything that appears or disappears. Self-realization is said to be complete peace, the perfect fullness of bliss, and indeed this is so. Sages and scriptures declare that one ought to seek self-realization, that itself is the purpose of life, and indeed it is so. Yet what is the realization itself? When ignorance is destroyed, that is, when misidentification is eliminated, that which remains is it. But that which remains did not just begin. And being unborn or beginningless, it is deathless and endless. Self-realization is declared to be atmastiti, abidance as the self. Now, there are not two selves that one would abide as another. So what is meant? Your being, your existence, as it truly ever is, unchanging, forever unmodified, is itself the very substance of realization. Abidance as the self is known as self-knowledge. It is not a kind of knowledge like a thought that comes and goes, nor is it the possession of anyone, as if an individual would become realized, rather than the realization that there's no individual. The knowledge is of an imperceptible, inconceivable nature. In self-knowledge, being is knowing, just as existence is consciousness. So then, if you earnestly desire self-realization, inquire within yourself as to who realizes. Who are you? If you are not the body, inclusive of the senses, as well as the prana, if you are not the mind in any of its permutations, if you are not contained within such, and if you are not the ego, the notion of existing as an individual entity, what remains? What are you? The self is itself the knowledge. The self is itself the realization. It neither comes nor goes, as you do not come or go. For your existence is always. Sri Bhagavan declared that the egoless state is the only real state that there is. That state is self-realization. It is innate. The self that is Brahman is the only real self that there is. An unrealized state would belong to an unrealized being. Is there such a one? If presently you have the doubt, but I am not realized, if that is the idea in your mind, inquire as to who it is that is supposedly not realized. There's only one self. It is the one reality. To imagine yourself as an individual or a mind that is in another state is purely illusory. Imagination. And when the conjurer of imagination is sought, such a one is nowhere to be found. What remains is absolute existence, consciousness, bliss, Satchidananda. That which remains is now also and forever.
Thank you, Master. There is an instruction attributed to the Maharshi which seems in line with the discourse, but maybe from a slightly, or worded in a slightly different perspective. And it would be really great to get clarification on how to take it to heart, which is, it's some kind of a response to where he says, your best spiritual efforts are necessary, but can only take you so far. At which point the self absorbs what seemed to be the individual. And that particular inspiration is something that seems worth pondering and clarifying.
Where the I disappears and identity is absorbed in its origin, how can we speak of effort? Nor can we speak of its opposite. The advice should not be misconstrued into the meaning such as this, that one should abandon one's efforts. Who would do such a thing? But the effort should be directed at the dissolution of that very I. And what better way could there be to dissolve the I than to find its unreality through an inquiry, who am I? The individual cannot realize the self. The individual is a fallacy, unreal. The unreal does not realize the real. The reality alone has the ability to comprehend itself. That reality is truly yourself. Abandon the assumption that there is another kind of self. If you then wonder, how do I abandon it? Simply inquire to know, who am I? The I notion will vanish. The self alone will remain in its own knowledge of itself. Such is the absorption referred to. Such is also grace.
an experience that in order for there to be a space wherein there is the recognition of the truth, which you so wonderfully speak of, that there it seems that the natural prerequisite is some kind of shraddha, or faith in the words of the teacher, the scriptures, and the community of realized ones throughout history, so to speak, the dream-like history. Enough that the inquirer is willing, not willful as an egoic willfulness, but just kind of like a gentle, surrendered willingness to just actually not be the feverish seeker just for a little while to see what happens if they don't retain the identity, the misidentification with the body-mind seeker entity. And then when that willingness is there, that the truth is just can become evident just without effort, and also without a separate self, like stopping effort.
Shraddha is very useful, extremely useful. Faith in the scriptures, faith in the Guru, faith in the teaching, as well as there is shraddha in terms of one's own existence, doubtless faith. If the seeker abandons the misidentification with the body and the mind, that will suffice. He need not get rid of the identity of being a seeker. That will absorb itself. After all, if one determines, I will abandon being the seeker, he is still the same seeker. That's why he's abandoning. The very nature of the seeker is that which he seeks. If he simply seeks his own nature, everything comes out right.
I guess what it was difficult to express was that, as you say, there wouldn't be a separate self to abandon being the seeker, but just a sense comes within consciousness, some inspiration or inclination that perhaps you are not what you thought yourself to be. Perhaps you are not that seeker to either make a decision to continue seeking or drop the seeking. It's just kind of like a subtle sense that arises.
Yes, that is
it's
all.
difficult to talk about.
That is all right. From a slightly different angle of vision, if one would not abandon seeking, but abandon everything else, perfection would be realized.
That's certainly resonates as true as well. Thank you.
Since you mentioned scripture, generally it would be found in the scripture advice. The advice found is to seek and to seek ardently. not too much advice is given that says don't seek. Wonder why that is.
Recently in my meditation, there's something gone that used to be there. And what was there was this strong assumption that the ego was going to come back, rise up out of its own self. This thing would appear that I really didn't have any control over, but it was going to come back. Now in deep meditation, I know that it doesn't come back on its own from that viewpoint. But I don't have the certainty that it never started. I don't have that certainty. There's something that I'm not understanding about myself.
As to the one who lacks certainty, what is his nature?
Well, he seems to be the one who's trying to find certainty.
In what is certainty found?
Certainty is found in existence.
Is the nature of that existence an ego?
No, that's for certain.
Are there then two or more selves? An ego self and a non-ego self?
Well, non-ego self doesn't make any sense. That's what the ego is not, is another self.
How many selves are there?
Well, to answer that, I'd have to figure out what a self is.
That would be wise.
Yeah.
So then, first find out what the self is. And then you can decide whether the ego has been destroyed or whether it never came to be.
Asking that question, what is the self? I just feel like I get swallowed into the question. What it's doing is it's destroying my concept of what the self is when I really try to answer that question. The concepts go away, and I also know the concepts about myself start to go away too.
If you are not anything conceived, what are you?
Well, if I ask the question, can I experience my existence as a thought? Can I conceive my existence? And that I can't do that. I can't make my existence turn into a thought, and it's never a thought.
If it is never a thought, how could it be an ego?
It can't.
This is to be realized conclusively interiorly, not just thought about.
What you just said is really helpful because I can see there's things I do in my practice that I'm calling meditation, but it's really just thinking about it.
It is all right to think about it. Just don't stop there.
Well, what's helpful is I can see there's places that I thought I was meditating, but I was actually thinking. Now I can see there's things that I'm doing that are thinking that aren't meditation. And that's helpful to see that because that's part of the misidentification, I would think, is what that is. Because I'm having some thoughts, I'm actually thinking that that's real instead of penetrating those thoughts and finding out I'm not in those thoughts.
Are thoughts the existence itself?
No, in contrast to the existence, they don't exist. So they can't possibly be, they can't be the existence. That's kind of the primary nature of a thought. It's not existence.
So then your bondage or uncertainty is merely imagined. How could you be really bound by a non-existent thought? The non-existent doesn't have a trace of existence, and existence itself has not a trace of non-existence. Therefore, there are not two, as in two selves, to choose between. The discrimination between the self and the not-self is the discrimination between the real and the unreal. When one so discriminates and discards the unreal, has anything really been discarded? As for the reality, it is not attained anew. But where the ego notion and all its attendant vasanas subside, the self remains shining in its own light. self-luminous.
So the quote that Jay was referring to about the Maharshi, I was thinking about that. And, it seems like, at least this is what I got from it, is that realization just takes over. It's not like a doing. The ego doesn't do this. It's not like the ego can get you anywhere. Like,
The ego doesn't realize because the ego does not exist.
Yeah, so that was good, because it seems like it's almost that drive to know yourself. Like this whole inquiry thing, it seems like, I don't remember the exact question you asked, but, I was meditating on it. It seems like, oh yeah, that introversion, or even that quote from the Maharshi, just like, oh yeah, this isn't a doing. This is like, it seems like though I have to eliminate those things that I think of as myself, because that stuff is going to be in the way otherwise.
So you're merely eliminating ignorance. That is not an action. That is a matter of knowledge.
Yeah.
So, Adi Shankaracharya's frequent comments to the effect that action does not bring liberation, self-knowledge alone is liberation. It is not a doing, it is knowledge.
So actually, I just got...
Not knowledge by an ego, rather the knowledge of consciousness, of itself, by itself.
I was just thinking that, what I just got was that the whole deepening of practice, any elimination of ignorance, because I was thinking that part actually took something actually objective in a sense, right? But that doesn't, none of it involves the ego.
So for elimination of the unreal ignorance, nothing is better than persevering self-inquiry. Intense, ardent, persevering practice of inquiry. Is the end appearing as the means? The perseverance derives from the perpetual existence of the self. The knowledge is of the nature of consciousness. The intensity is of the nature of reality. What could possibly be more consistent than yourself, your own existence? To imagine yourself as other than that existence is unnatural. As soon as such an unnatural state of ignorance supervenes, right then and there, there is naturally the call for liberation within you. That call to know the self, the same as the desire to be happy, is answered completely in the knowledge of yourself. So truly speaking, spiritual practice in any of its aspects has absolutely nothing to do with the ego. The destruction of the illusion of which are their purpose.
So there would be no such thing as... That's why you say there's no such thing as really inquiry that doesn't work. Because any introversion is, by definition, would be elimination. Because you would have to. The only way you'd be able to do that is by eliminating the unreality, seeing the real.
To say it would not work would be like saying one's being is out of order, or that consciousness is not working. It is absurd.
But it seems like what has to happen in that case is more determined, or more assumptions have to be investigated, because there's some assumption there that be preventing you from being, realizing that deeper.
So inquire, discern what you assume and what truly is the case regarding your existence. Dive deep into the nature of the one who assumes. If you penetrate the heart of the ego, only the self is found.
So staying on that trail of that assumption, or whatever form that would be. Of separation, of whatever it would be, assuming that, there's a distance or there's two, whatever, who is there for that assumption. So it seems like that's what, I miss a lot. But being able to see that sometimes itself takes the grace, or takes, myself.
Grace is ever there. Be determined to trace your existence. Like in the Maharshi's analogy of the dog searching its master.
I see. What is it?
The analogy of a dog searching for its master. Nothing else matters. He just follows the scent, one-pointedly, till he arrives. In the same way, keep on tracing out your sense of existence. Bark if you understand.
त्रिपञ्चाज्ञान्यधो वक्षे पूर्वोक्तस्य हि लब्धये तैश्च सर्वे सदा कार्यं निदिध्यासनमेव तु.
For the gaining of the liberation aforesaid, I shall now explain 15 steps, by the help of all of which one should at all times practice meditation.
नित्याभ्यासादृदे प्राप्तिः न भवेत् सच्चिदात्मनः तस्माद् ब्रह्मनिदिध्यासे जिज्ञासुश्रेयसे चिरम्.
Without constant practice, the self that is pure existence and knowledge cannot be realized. Therefore, one who desires knowledge and seeks liberation should meditate on Brahman for a long time.
यमो हि नियमस्त्यागो मौनं देशश्च कालता आसनं मूलबन्धश्च देहसाम्यं च दृक्स्थितिः.
The control of the senses, yama, the control of the intellect, niyama, the avoidance of unreality, tyaga, spiritual silence, mauna, place, desha, time, kala, posture, asana, the subdual of the root cause, mulabandha, the equipoise of the body, deha samya, the firmness of vision, Driksthiti.
प्राणसंयमनं चैव प्रत्याहारश्च धारणा आत्मध्यानं समाधिश्च प्रोक्तान्यङ्गानि वैक्रमात्.
The control of life forces, pranayama, the withdrawal of consciousness, pratyahara, the holding of consciousness, dharanya, self-contemplation, dhyana, and absorption, samadhi. These in order are said to be the steps.
सर्वं ब्रह्मेदि विज्ञानाद् इन्द्रियग्रामसंयमः यमो यमिति सम्प्रोक्तो अभ्यसनीयो मुहुर्मुहुः.
The control of all the senses by means of the knowledge all is Brahman is called yama and should be practiced again and again.
सजातीय प्रवाहश्च विजातीय तिरस्कृतिः नियमो हि परानन्दो नियमात् क्रियते बुधैः.
The incessant flow of thought towards all that is relates to the self and the submergence of all that relates to the not self is called niyama. It imparts supreme bliss and is assiduously practiced by the wise. त्यागप्रपञ्चरूपस्य चिदात्मत्वावलोकनात् त्यागो हि महतां पूज्यः सद्यो मोक्षमयो यतः. Tyaga is the elimination of the phenomenon of the universe by realizing the self that is Brahman. Tyaga is venerated even by the great because it is of the nature of instant liberation.
यस्मात् वाचो निवर्तन्ते अप्राप्य मनसा सह यन्मौनं योगिभिर्गम्यं तद्भवेत् सर्वदा बुधः.
The wise man should always see himself as that mauna from which word and thought, not reaching it, turn away, but which is attainable by yogis.
वाचो यस्मान्निवर्तन्ते तद्वक्तुं केन शक्यते प्रपञ्चो यदि वक्तव्यः सोऽपि शब्दविवर्जितः.
Who can speak of that form from which all words turn away? If the universe is to be spoken of, even that is devoid of words.
इति वा तद्भवेन्मौनं सतां सहजसंज्ञितं गिरा मौनं तु बालानां प्रयुक्तं ब्रह्मवादिभिः.
The above may also be termed mauna and is known as sahaja among the enlightened. The mauna relating to speech has been ordained by the teachers of Brahman for the ignorant.
आदावन्ते च मध्ये च जनो यस्मिन्न विद्यते येनेदं सततं व्याप्तं सदेशो विजनस्मृतः.
That in which no individual existence is possible, at the beginning or the end or in the middle, that by which this universe is at all times pervaded, that is known as the solitary place, desha.
कलनात् सर्वभूतानां ब्रह्मादीनां निमेषतः कालशब्देन निर्दिष्टो ह्यखण्डानन्दकोद्वयः.
The secondless Brahman, that is infinite bliss, is known as Kala, because by it are manifested, in the twinkling of an eye, all creatures from the Creator downward.
सुखेनैव भवेद्यस्मिन् अजस्रं ब्रह्मचिन्तनम् आसनं तद्विजानीयात् नेतरत् सुखनाशनम्.
The condition in which Brahman is incessantly contemplated with unmixed bliss is known as asana, and not other postures which destroy bliss.
நிதாகன் ஆச்சாரியர் கிருபையால் அவித்தை முதலான உபாதி நீங்கி நித்த சுத்த புத்த முக்த சிதாகாய ஸ்வரூபமாய் ஜீவன் முக்தி தன்மை அடைந்ததை உரைக்கும் அத்தியாயம். அகமுறவே அகண்ட பர பிரம்ம ஞானம் அடைந்ததனால் ஆனந்த திருப்தனான மகிமை மிகும் நிதகமுனி குருவை நோக்கி மகிழ்வுடனே மீளமுவிவசனம் சொல்வான். தகமை மிகும் தேசிகவோர் நிமித்தமின்றி தயையொன்றாய் நீ அருளும் உபதேசத்தால் ஜகமுதலாம் மயக்கங்கள் அனைத்தும் நீங்கி சத்திய ஞானானந்த பிரம்மமானே. குருவரனே நீ அருளும் உபதேசத்தால் குறைவு தரும் அவிதை முதல் உபாதி நீங்கி நிர்மலமாய் நிஷ்களமாய் நீங்கா சத்தாய் நிகழுணர்வாய் நிரதிசயானந்தமாகி சர்வ பரிபூரணமாய் சாந்தமாகி சனதனமாய் சலனமிலா ஸ்வபாவமாகி அருவமதாய் அயலிலதாய் அமர்ந்து நின்ற அகண்ட சிதாகாய பர பிரம்மமானே. உத்தமனே நீ அருளும் உபதேசத்தால் உண்மையுறா மாயை முதல் உபாதி நீங்கி சுத்தமதாய் சுககணமாய் சோர்வில்லாதாய் சுதந்திரமாய் ஸ்வயம் ஜோதி ஸ்வபாவமாகி நித்தியமாய் நிர்குணமாய் நிகரில்லாதாய் நிரஞ்சனமாய் நிரமயமாய் நிமலமாகி அத்வைத பூரணமாய் அமர்ந்து நின்ற அகண்ட சிதாகாய பர பிரம்மமானே. தேசிகனே நீ அருளும் உபதேசத்தால் திருஷியமாய் திகழும் மயல் அனைத்தும் நீங்கி மாசிலதாய் மனமிலதாய் மலமில்லாதாய் மகத்துக்கும் மகத்தாகி மதிக்கெட்டாதாய் பாசமிலா பரசிவமாய் பரமான்மாவாய் பரபரமாய் பரவின்னாய் பகுப்பில்லாதாய் ஆசனுகா அறிவுருவாய் அமர்ந்து நின்ற அகண்ட சிதாகாய பர பிரம்மமானே. ஆசிரிய நீ அருளும் உபதேசத்தால் ஆவரண விக்ஷேபம் அனைத்தும் நீங்கி சாசுவத சுபவமதாய் சலியா சித்தாய் சதானந்த கனமாகி சகஜான்மாவாய் பேசவுணா பேரொளியாய் பிரிவில்லாதாய் பெரிதுக்கும் பெரிதாகி பிரம்மான்மாவாய் ஈசன் முதல் எவையுமில்லாத கண்டமான ஏகசிதாகாய பர பிரம்மமானே. பரகுருவே நீ அருளும் உபதேசத்தால் பரஜீவ ஜகங்களெனும் பகுப்பு நீங்கி ஒரு வழிவாய் உத்தமமாய் ஒழிவில்லாதாய் உரை மனது கெட்டாத உண்மையாகி புரையிலதாய் பூரணமாய் பூமான்மாவாய் புராதனமாய் புனிதமதாய் பொருவில்லாதாய் இருளொளி மற்றவையுமில்லா அகண்டமான ஏகசிதாகாய பர பிரம்மமானே. அற்புதனே நீ அருளும் உபதேசத்தால் அகத்திலுள்ள பேதமயல் அனைத்தும் நீங்கி சிற்பதமாய் சின்மயமாய் சிறிதில்லாதாய் சிதம்பரமாய் சிதானந்த கணமேயாகி தற்பதமாய் தடையிலதாய் தளர்வில்லாதாய் தத்துவமாய் தான் தானாய் தனித்ததாகி நிர்பயமாய் நிரந்தரமாய் நிறைந்து நின்ற நிகழில் சிதாகாய பர பிரம்மமானே. மெய்த்தவனே நீ அருளும் உபதேசத்தால் மேவு மனோவாதனைகள் அனைத்தும் நீங்கி சத்திய சுககணமாய் சலனமின்றி சமமாகி சால உபசாந்தமாகி நித்திய நின்மலமாகி நிருவிக்ஷேப நிரவரண நிஷ்கிரிய ஸ்வபாவமாகி அத்வைதாகண்ட பரிபூன்றமான அமல சிதாகாய பர பிரம்மமானே. மாதவனே நீ அருளும் உபதேசத்தால் மனதிலுள்ள மயக்கமெல்லாம் கணத்தில் நீங்கி கோதிலதாய் குணமிலதாய் குறியில்லாதாய் குறைவிலதாய் குணாதீத ஸ்வபாவமாகி ஏதுமொரு விகற்பமுமே என்றும் இன்றி ஏக பரிபூரணமாய் இகழ்வில்லாதாய் ஆதிமுடி ஒன்றுமில்லாத கண்டமான அமல சிதாகாய பர பிரம்மமானே. வெகுவிதமாய் விளம்பி என்ன சுருங்க சொல்வேன் வேறறவே தேசிகனி உபதேசித்த தகமை மிகும் தத்துவமசி ஆதி வாக்கிய தாற்பய பொருளையெல்லாம் நன்றாயாய்ந்திங்கு அகமரவே அகம் பிரம்மம் என்னும் ஞானம் அடைந்ததனால் அகண்ட பரம் ஆனந்தத்தை மிக மிகவும் புஜித்தவனாய் திருப்தனாகி மெய்யுணர்வானந்த பரம் பொருளாய் நின்றேன். சத்குருவின் முன்பாக இந்த நூலின் சாரமதாம் பரம்பொருளை கேட்ட பின்னர் துர்குணமாம் லோபமெல்லாம் தூர தள்ளி தொடர்புற்ற திரவியமே முதலாலந்த சத்குருவை தந்தேகம் உள்ள மட்டும் சலியாத பக்தியுடன் பூஜிப்போர்க்கே விக்கினமே இன்றியகம் பிரம்மம் என்னும் வேறுபடா அகண்ட பர ஞானம் தோன்றும். அன்றியுமே விதியுடனே நியமமாக அமலமதாம் விபூதியினால் அங்கமெல்லாம் நன்றுறவே அணிந்து திரு புண்டரத்தை நலமாக சந்ததமும் தரிப்போருக்கே துன்றியனர் பரமசிவ கருணையுண்டாம் தோன்றியவ கருணையினால் சித்தம் தூய்தாய் என்றும் ஒரு விக்கினமும் இன்றி நன்றாய் இருமையிலா அகம் பிரம்மம் ஞானம் தோன்றும். பக்தியுடன் விபூதியுடை தாரணத்தால் பாசுபத விரதமென பகரலாகும் சத்தியமாம் விபூதியுடை தாரணத்தால் சடிதியினில் அகண்ட பர ஞானம் உண்டாம். உத்தம விப்பாசுபத விரதம் தன்னை ஒரு வருஷம் அனுஷ்டித்தும் பாதம் பெற்றேன். அஸ்தனினதருளானின் அகண்ட ஞானம் அடைந்தவனாய் ஆன்மாவில் அமர்ந்து நின்றேன். சுத்தமதாய் நீ அருளும் உபதேசத்தை சூக்ஷ்மமாம் புத்தியினால் மனனம் செய்து நித்தமுமே ஆதரவாய் இடைவிடாமல் நிச்சலமாய் எப்போதும் நிதித்தியாசித்து சத்துருவாமாவரண விக்ஷேபங்கள் சற்றுமிலா அகண்ட பர ஞானம் பெற்றிங்கு அத்வைத பரபிரம்மஸ்வரூபமாகி அதிவர்ண ஆசிரமி ஆனேனையா. குறைவரவே செய்கின்ற நிதித்தியாசத்தால் கோரமூடங்களெனும் விருத்தி நீங்கி மறைவரவே சத்துருவாம் விருத்தி ஒன்றான் மாசற்ற அகண்ட பரபோதம் பெற்று நிறைவுறவே ஆனந்தம் அனுபவித்து நித்திய ஞானானந்த வடிவேயாகி அறிவுருவோர் ஆசிரம வண்ணமின்றி அதிவர்ண ஆசிரமியானேனையா. சத்குருவே நீ அருளி செய்த வண்ணம் சந்ததமும் சலியாமல் ஸ்ரத்தையோடே நிர்குணமாம் பரபிரம்ம நானே என்று நேசமுடன் நிரந்தரமாய் நிதித்தியாசித்து முக்குணமும் கடந்த பரபோதம் பெற்று மூதுணர்வாம் பரபிரம்ம நானேயாகி துர்குணமாம் எக்குணமும் தூர தள்ளி துகளற்ற குணாதீத நானேனையா. ஆசிரிய நீ அருளி செய்த வண்ணம் அனிசமகம் பிரம்மாஸ்மி என்பதாக நேசமுடன் நிரந்தரமாய் தியானம் செய்து நிகில மனோ விகற்பமுமே நீங்கினோனாய் சாசுவத சுரூபத்தின் நிர்விகல்ப சமாதி நிலை பெற்றவனாய் சாந்தனாகி பேசவோனா பரபிரம்ம போதம் பெற்று பெருமை மிகும் பிராமணனான் நானேனையா.